A famous writer says that cognition is not fighting, but once someone knows a lot, he will have much to fight for, so much that he will be called a relativist because of it. Lesson 1: Cognition. Cognition has been a subject of investigation since the time of ancient Greeks. It is commonly defined as the mental process of knowing about something. It includes several elements or processes that all work to describe how our knowledge is built up and our judgments are made. Among these are processes like perceiving, thinking, knowing, remembering, judging, recognizing, conceptualizing, learning, reasoning, problem-solving, memory, and language. A good presentation is that which is comprehensible. Comprehension involves cognition. There are many higher-level functions of the brain which are used during comprehension, like language processing, concept formation, imagination, perception, planning, and the development of such behavior. Some of these functions are very important and have a great deal of influence on our ability to carry out everyday tasks like perceiving, acquiring, processing, and remembering information for decision-making. In this chapter, some of these functions are discussed to help presenters to learn how to present information in a comprehensible format. Presenting information always has some goals. Presenters seek for a desired action from audiences, and audiences expect some useful information from the presenter. The knowledge of concepts like cognitive load theory, types of cognitive load, individuals' processing capacity, and coherence principle are very useful to achieve such goals. In this chapter we have included sufficient information regarding these topics to help presenters make their presentation effective. Cognition functions. Cognitive functions are directly or indirectly involved in many cognition processes which we come across during our routine life, like thinking, knowing, remembering, judging, and problem solving. These functions also influence our ability to carry out everyday tasks like attention, memorizing, decision-making, etc. Some of these functions are discussed here. Attention. It is the cognitive process of selectively concentrating on one aspect of the environment while ignoring others. Attention has also been referred to as the allocation of processing resources. Point 2. For example, we are in a gathering and listening to our friend while ignoring the discussion of other people. This ability to focus on listening to our friend while ignoring the conversation of others around us depends on our ability to pay attention. In simple words, it is withdrawal from some things in order to deal effectively with others. Memory. Memory is our ability to store, retain, and recall information. Humans have three types of memory. Sensory memory. It corresponds approximately to the initial 200-500 milliseconds after an item is perceived. Because this form of memory degrades so quickly, so one could not remember the details of all the items what he/she has seen. Usually in a presentation session, participants often report that they seem to see more than they can actually report. 2. Short-term memory. It allows recall for a period of several seconds to a minute without rehearsal. George A. Miller III conducted experiments showing that the store of short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 2 items. However, some individuals have been reported to be able to remember large amounts of information quickly, and be able to recall that information in seconds. Short-term memory also manages information used to carry out cognitive tasks such as selecting and understanding information and practically applying that for decision-making and learning. For example, in case of adding two numbers in our mind, we hold information about both numbers and the process needs to be done with them. 3. Long-term memory. In contrast to short-term memory, long-term memory can store much larger quantities of information for potentially long duration, sometimes it may be a whole lifespan. It allows us to recall experiences, facts, and acquired skills. Compared to other two memories, its capacity is immeasurably large. For example, we can remember a list of names for years. Executive function. The term executive function describes a collection of brain functions that are responsible for guiding thought and behavior according to individuals' situation and mental caliber. The concept is used by psychologists and neuroscientists to describe a loosely defined collection of brain processes which are responsible for planning, cognitive flexibility, abstract thinking, rule acquisition, initiating appropriate actions, inhibiting inappropriate actions, and selecting relevant sensory information. The executive functions are often invoked to perform some tedious tasks. For example, executive functions allow us to use past experiences to generate plans to carry out everyday tasks or to perform multiple tasks, for example, listening to a radio station while driving. Motor coordination. Motor coordination allows us to coordinate our movements with what we see around us. Motor coordination involves the integration of processes ranging from how muscles interact with the skeletal system to neural processes controlling them both in the spine and the brain. For example, catching a ball requires a precise coupling between the trajectory we see the ball is taking and the movement that we make with our arm to catch it. If our visual input and movements are not well coordinated, we are likely to miss the ball and might be hit in the face. Motor coordination is also important when playing video games since our ability to perform well requires us to coordinate what we see on the screen with the movement of our hands. Speed of processing. Speed of processing refers less to a particular cognitive function than to the efficiency cognitive processes which are involved in performing cognitive tasks. For example, the time we spent to fix a puzzle, to identify a person, to recall a name, etc. Likewise, skill at crossword puzzles depends on how quickly we can use our memory and language ability to remember and generate solutions for each word of the puzzle. As fast we perform such tasks, as faster will be our speed of processing information. Speed of processing is vital to intelligence. It varies from individual to individual. It also depends on individual's background, knowledge of the subject, learning experiences, etc. Individuals' processing capacity. Evidences have found that individuals systematically differ in their processing capacity and have a fixed capacity for information processing, irrespective of the task in hand, or more accurately, irrespective of the secrets of successful presenters' processes and individual uses in solving any given task. Tasks may range from remembering a list of names to solving a complex differential equation. Identifying individuals' processing capacity is extremely important for predicting their behavior and selecting presentation style for them. In this regard, two aspects need special consideration. Presenter must know about the cognitive load imposed by the processes to be used for understanding the provided information. 2. Presenter must ensure that audiences are actually using those processes which have been assumed in computing cognitive load. The knowledge of these aspects will be very helpful in making your presentation more valuable and understandable. Cognitive load theory. Cognitive load is a term that refers to the load on working memory during instructions. Instructions may be aimed at teaching learners problem-solving skills, thinking and reasoning skills, including perception, memory, language, etc. It provides guidelines to present information in a manner that encourages audiences' learning activities and optimizes their intellectual performance. The initial work on cognitive load theory could be credited to G. A. Miller. He was perhaps the first social scientist who explored the limitations of our short-term memory. His experimental results suggested that humans' short-term memory has a limited capacity and can only be able to hold 7 plus or minus 2 digits of information. Simon and CHASE10 used the term chunk to describe the way people organize information in their short-term memory. They